Cove of Cork, on the southeast coast of Ireland, was the migrant port for 1 million people in the years of Irish despair, their destination America. On a misty spring morning in 1885, an emigrant's child landed here from New York, his destiny Irish leader and president. His Irish mother, Catherine, had married in New Jersey a handsome Spanish music teacher, Eamon De Valera. On Vivian's death, Patrick Coll from Broree, County Limerick, was entrusted with the boy, then 2 years old. No greater contrast could be imagined than the transition from Manhattan to Broree, where young De Valera arrived just in time to move with his uncle's family into their brand new labourer's cottage. Three years after his arrival in Ireland, young Eddie De Valera was ready for school. The Broree National School of his day is now named after him. It's become a museum and library. He was not the best at attendance in the school, and when he was 11, he wrote asking his aunt in America to persuade his mother to bring him back to the States. Truly, the story of Ireland in this century was dependent on her answer. However, he was sent to the higher grade Christian Brothers School in Charleville. This meant often walking the 7 miles there. They couldn't afford to buy him a bicycle. His scholastic career had begun: Latin and Greek, English and French, mathematics, but no Irish and no history. At 16, he went to Blackrock College in Dublin, and from pupil, he soon became professor of mathematics. Through his studies of the Gaelic language and culture, he met another enthusiast, Sinead Ní Lanagáin, and married her in 1910. The decade of destiny had come, and in 1916, despairing of non-violence achieving Irish freedom, militants rose in revolt. But hopes of an independent republic were submerged in a sea of explosive and incendiary shells, which tore the heart out of the old city of Dublin. De Valera was one of the leaders, and their surrender after a week's siege brought execution to some and imprisonment to others, including De Valera. Within months, public opinion in most of Ireland had veered around to support the ideals of the men of 1916. A new parliament was created, Dáil Éireann. It consisted of members elected in the general election of 1918. They met in the Mansion House on January the 21st, 1919. And hoped for a final peace with England, an Irish delegation, headed by man of theory Arthur Griffith and man of action Michael Collins, was sent by the President to London. There they continued negotiations until midnight on the 6th of December 1921, when a compromise treaty was signed. A dominion, to be called the Irish Free State, was to be instituted, the Republican ideal set aside or postponed. This split the Dáil and army down the middle, for and against. The war lost and prison term done, De Valera fought election after election until in 1932 he was elected President of the Executive Council of the Irish Free State. His first action was to release the political prisoners, but perhaps the militants had no grounds to be confident about the new order. Among the optimists was Maud Gonne MacBride.
Black enough for us all, but Ireland has stood together in this. The Irish, the IRA stood firm, and they have defeated Cosgrave and the coercionists.
De Valera put Frank Aiken in charge of the National Army. As IRA leader a decade before, he had fought them tooth and nail. They had beaten him, but now, on St. Patrick's Day 1932, he took the salute as their new Minister for Defence. The Irish people sighed with relief. The government had changed. The Army's loyalty was in no doubt. The continuity of the state was guaranteed. This was a meaningful moment in Irish self-government. The next task was to meet the British, for both economic and constitutional changes were in the President's mind. The treaty needed to be amended to eliminate causes of friction. An annual financial tribute to Westminster had to be queried. Both bones of contention were to be harshly picked for 5 long years. But a sovereign state has other responsibilities, and the new Irish president was called upon to preside over the League of Nations Assembly in Geneva.
I want you to believe that we in Ireland desire peace, peace at home and throughout the world. In spite of the opinions you may have formed from misleading reports, I want you to know that our history is the history of a people who have consistently sought only to be allowed to lead their own lives in their own way, in peace with their neighbours and with the world.
Statesmen at international headquarters are transformed to politicians when they get home. In 1933, De Valera decided to go to the people and ask them for an overall majority. Opposed to him was the opposition party of Mr. W.T. Cosgrave. From school teacher to soldier had been an unexpected transition for De Valera. The switch from militants to parliamentarians won him and his colleagues the description of politicians by accident. They became experts. He got his overall majority, and what he had to say was now seen to be the likely policy for years to come.
Has now been definitely adopted as the national policy of the Irish people. That programme aims at restoring the unity of Ireland and securing its independence, at placing as many families as possible upon the land, at building up our industries so that the food we eat, the clothes we wear, the houses we live in, the articles in common daily use in the lives of our people may all, as far as is reasonably possible, be produced by Irish labour from Irish materials. Ireland united, Ireland free, Ireland self-supporting and self-reliant, Ireland speaking her own tongue, and through it giving to the world her ancient treasures of Christian Gaelic culture. These are the ideals to which enthusiastic young Ireland is now devoting its energies.
In the 1930s, the mail boat from Dundee to Holyhead was still the quickest route to London. But the sea crossing was often something of a test. Politicians then needed to be good sailors too. De Valera made many such crossings. Always the Irish and England would know and wait around to cheer. The news was sometimes frustrating, but progress was made. Economic peace between the two countries was attained. A new relationship with the Crown was accepted by the British government. Above all, a new understanding gave hope for the future. But always the partition of Ireland in 2 parts remained a cancer.
We have no wish to coerce into a united Ireland our fellow countrymen in the northeast who differ from us. But we do ask them and all their friends to consider whether it is not their duty to play their part in bringing about a united Ireland, which is so essential now, not merely for the betterment of relations between ourselves in Ireland, but for the establishment of friendly relations with Great Britain and for the promotion of peace in the world.
The plea was ignored, and 30 years later, the north of Ireland was to explode in tragedy. Meanwhile, the Constitution of Ireland, presented by Eamon De Valera and enacted by the people in 1937, stabilised the fundamental law in the Irish state. The President again went to London in 1938, and in April, a comprehensive agreement was signed. In particular, the southern and western harbour defences of Ireland, retained under British military control up to then, were transferred to the Irish government. The effect of the agreement was to make Irish neutrality in World War II possible. As British troops of the Royal Garrison Artillery and Royal Engineers moved out, equivalent Irish Army personnel moved in. De Valera was in Cove Harbour for the ceremonies. He knew the importance of the transfer, which, with the then approval of the British government and Admiralty, was to have the effect of insulating the Irish state from the worst effects of World War II, if it came. De Valera threw himself into the desperate efforts to preserve peace, and in 1939 was again President of the League of Nations. But mankind's hopes died with the falling leaves of autumn. On the day war came, the British liner Athenia was torpedoed and sunk, her survivors being brought ashore at Galway. Air raid precautions teams were trained. Recruiting marches for all the auxiliary services were organized. De Valera was seen to have a firm control over all aspects of the drive. His declared aims were to shield the Irish people, to preserve neutrality, and to ensure Ireland would not become a base for enemy attack on England. Shielding the people included the Ulster people too. These fire brigades were ordered to Belfast when that city was badly blitzed. While many thousands joined the British war effort from all over Ireland, the Irish army itself was increased to over 160,000. And in secret, the British and Irish armies planned joint action in the event of a German invasion of Ireland. But Churchill would not forgive Ireland's neutrality, and in his victory speech attacked De Valera for inaction while Britain stood alone. De Valera replied, could he not find in his heart the generosity to acknowledge that there is a small nation that stood alone, not for a year or two, but for several hundred years, against aggression, a small nation that could never be got to accept defeat. Rarely in his lifetime did De Valera ever have such a united people as at that moment. In the meantime, his family was growing up, and Vivian, a major in the army, married while still in uniform. It was a rare opportunity for the Irish leader to leave aside the affairs of state and enjoy the company of his family. With the coming of peace, new air routes symbolized Ireland's emergence from wartime isolation. One of the first travellers on the Dublin to London route was De Valera himself, bound for trade talks. The world was beginning to get on its feet after the war, but things had changed radically. Ireland, indeed, was more seriously affected by shortages and unemployment in the immediate post-war years than she had been at the height of the struggle. In 1948, the wartime leader had to face the electorate again, this time against the mounting pressure for change after his 16 years' rule. Prominent among his opponents and leading a left-wing group was Sean MacBride. Pinched from both left and right, De Valera's Fianna Fáil party lost to a coalition of all the other parties in the Dáil, and the seal of office was handed to their chosen leader, John A. Costello, a prominent Dublin lawyer. Always an opponent of De Valera's constitutional policy, Mr. Costello sought to rationalise the situation as he saw it by legislation which specifically described the Irish state as a republic, which was given a ceremonial welcome at Easter 1949. But the British government under Clement Attlee reacted by giving new guarantees to the loyalists of Northern Ireland. Meanwhile, two men who had left behind wartime controversy. One of De Valera's distinctions was to become and remain, for almost all of his public life, Chancellor of the National University of Ireland. In this happy gesture, he conferred an honorary degree upon the Vice-Chancellor of Queen's University, Belfast, Dr. Eric Ashley. Twice more, De Valera was to be elected Taoiseach. But in 1959, he finally handed over the leadership of the government to Sean Lemass and then offered himself as president. His opponent in the election was General Sean McEwen. De Valera's future was, once again, dependent on the popular will. It was 42 years since his name had first appeared on a ballot paper. The people again gave him the lead while paying tribute, with a considerable vote, to his opponent's national service and personal integrity. In St. Patrick's Hall of Dublin Castle, the man who had been teacher and soldier, prisoner and international statesman, took the oath of office as president. He was to remain so for 14 years. Little over a year later, he was to witness the sad return of those soldiers who, by their death at Niemba, in the stricken state of the Congo, were to symbolize the sacrifices that Ireland would have to make in return for her new international responsibilities. At the same time, John Kennedy, a man who was to stir the imagination of the whole world, had become President of the United States. When he came to Ireland as De Valera's guest in 1963, it seemed the whole nation wished to involve itself in his welcome. Within months, the joy had turned to grief with the news from Dallas. President De Valera was among the world's leaders who attended his funeral. He was to return later as guest of the new president, Lyndon Johnson. Twice before, he had spoken to Congress in 1919 and 1920, when he sought American help to bring about the kind of Ireland which he now, in great part, represented. Afterwards, he went to Arlington Cemetery to lay a wreath on President Kennedy's grave. Roosevelt and Churchill, Stalin and de Gaulle. In his time in public life, De Valera was to outspan many a captain and many a king. When the time came to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Rising of 1916, it was hard to credit that the tall and erect president, inspecting his guard of honor, had led men into battle over half a century before. Yet, when he had marched his men into their positions in Dublin City in 1916, he was already a mature, married man in his mid-30s. Dublin was en fete in 1966 for a week of celebrations, most of which the president attended. The disused jail at Kilmainham on the outskirts of Dublin was converted into a museum. It was in this prison yard that the leaders of the Rising had been executed by firing squad, and it was here that De Valera had been imprisoned under sentence of death. He lived to be host to the world's leaders. Of General de Gaulle, he said, "He was France to me. I did not cease to admire him." No one was more welcomed by him than an American, be it Hubert Humphrey or a GI going home. But his stature in the world brought to his residence in the Phoenix Park kings, presidents and princes from every continent. They were all received with courtesy, dignity and charm. His days varied from the very formal to the very personal. Once his car drew up to a church, as it so often did these days for the funeral of a friend, but this time it was for a moment of great joy, the ordination to the priesthood of one of his grandsons. Of his 6 surviving children, 3 had become professors and all shone in academics, medicine or the law. Another time, the President arrived at Dublin's Pro-Cathedral for Mass on St. Patrick's Day. When this church was planned nearly 200 years ago, the intolerant city fathers would not let it be built on a main thoroughfare. So the people went ahead and built it down a side street. Many things have changed since then, including Ireland's annual tribute to St. Patrick. On this occasion, President De Valera watched the parade go by. In Ireland these days, the people are given their choice very often, and membership of the European Economic Community was one issue to be put to the test of public opinion. De Valera himself had played a key part in the Strasbourg deliberations of 1949, from which emerged the beginnings of the common market. He could now, like every other Irish man or woman, vote yes or no to the new Europe. Overwhelmingly, the people accepted the challenge of membership. 23 years after he had so correctly advised the Europeans to build from small beginnings, he had the honour of signing Ireland into the membership of the enlarged community. The Taoiseach at the time of entry to the community was Jack Lynch, who shortly afterwards went to the country in search of an extended term of office. The people, however, indicated their wish for a change. And the outgoing ministers said goodbye to the President before being replaced by a new coalition government headed by Mr. Liam Cosgrave, to whom the President handed over the seal of office. As spring turned into summer, the 90-year-old president knew that his days in office were coming to an end, and he decided to make a tour of the country. He began where he had had his first glimpse of Ireland 88 years previously, the county of Cork. As his train entered the county, the people of the town of Mallow waited to greet him with demonstrations of affection. Another 20 miles, and he would be in the city of Cork, which was to pay him the honour of making him a freeman of the city. A proud people of an ancient city waited to welcome him. Their town was founded 1400 years ago. From its port and harbour sailed many famous ships to every part of the world. The first steamship to sail the Atlantic, the Sirius, was Cork-owned. The city's name comes from the Irish Corcaigh na Muin, the big marsh of Munster. The honour of freeman was accepted with humility and deep pleasure by the President. From the southern capital, Mr. De Valera's farewell tour turned westward towards the very centre of Ireland, the town of Athlone. When his train crossed the Shannon to Athlone station, he got out onto the platform to meet the people. His destination was Castlebar, County Mayo. His task there was very pleasing to him, the presentation of awards in the Glór na Gael competition, one of the means to assist in the preservation of the Irish language. No greater love had the President than for the language, no greater prayer than for its restoration as a spoken tongue. Lovely Lochgill in County Sligo was one more place he had to visit, where he was welcomed at a convent where girls learned domestic science. This is the Yeats country, which inspired Ireland's greatest modern poet to create in words thoughts of beauty and romance. The time came, as it always does, to go home. Besides, there were two other things to do while still president. The first was to go to Arbor Hill in Dublin, shrine of those who freely offered themselves in the cause of the Irish people, and where lie buried his comrades of the rising. With him goes the son of another comrade, the Taoiseach Liam Cosgrave. Then, to the scene of many triumphs, the debating chamber of the Irish House of Representatives, Dáil Éireann, to see again the 69th Regimental colours given to the Parliament by the late President Kennedy. What thoughts here invade the mind? 1926, entry into the Dáil. 1932, voted head of the government. The great debates, the oath, the annuities, the constitution, or on poverty and prosperity, peace and war. Here the government of the people, by the people, for the people. Back now to the residence to meet the last visitors. 14 years is the maximum time any president may stay in office. Already an election has been held and the name of the new president is known, Erskine Hamilton Childers. It was said of Eamon De Valera that those who have known him best always admired him most. To some of these, his staff in the residence, he now must say goodbye as he leaves for the last time as head of state. When our great city of Dublin was a small village, the local people built a castle here over 1,000 years ago. In the heart of that castle this day, President Childers comes to pledge himself to the service of the people.
Láthar dia na nilla chócht.
Láthar dia na nilla chócht.
Táimse Erskine Childers.
Táimse Erskine Childers.
I wish also on behalf of all present happiness, contentment, peace and God's blessing to Mr. and Mrs. De Valera in their retirement.
My leader and my friend for many years, I can testify to his statesmanlike counsel and above all to his kindness of heart. All of you here present have witnessed the dignity with which he has graced the office of President for the past 14 years. I join with the Taoiseach and with all of you in wishing Mr. De Valera and his gracious wife every happiness in their retirement.
In 1917, a wise and distinguished cleric told De Valera, "The Republic of Ireland is a dream which no man in his sober senses could hope to see realized." Today one may recall the words of Patrick Pearse. "Oh, wise men, riddle me this, what if the dreams come true? What if the dreams come true, and if millions unborn shall dwell in the house that I shaped in my heart?"